What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episodes 6 and 7 of one of my favorite shows of the year, Raised by Wolves. For the last few weeks, I've been operating under the mistaken assumption that this was actually an 8-episode miniseries. As it turns out, there are going to be 10 episodes total. And I'm thrilled that there's more story to go because as much as I loved episode 6, I was really disappointed by episode 7. And I'm glad the show's going to have the opportunity over the next 3 episodes to kind of bounce back. And while there's no information yet on who's going to be writing episode 8, I did see that the series creator, Aaron Guzikowski, will be back handling writing duties in episodes 9 and 10. And I think this show throughout the season has done a good job of sustaining the level of quality established by Ridley Scott in the opening 2 episodes. But the big surprise for me has been the discovery of director Sergio Mimica-Gazan, who directed both episode 5 as well as episode 6, 2 of the strongest episodes of the season, if not the strongest. And I should also mention that Don Joe wrote episode 6, Alex Gabassi directed episode 7, and episode 7 was written by Karen Campbell. And it's hard for me to gauge just how many people are watching this show because obviously HBO Max has not exactly taken off yet as a streaming platform, but I just want to reiterate that for sci-fi fans, this show is absolutely essential viewing. I think when it comes to the calendar year 2020, my 2 favorite science fiction shows by far have been Season 3 of Dark and Season 1 of Raised by Wolves. I probably still lean towards Dark as my favorite of the 2, but I definitely rank Raised by Wolves higher than Season 3 of Westworld. And I feel like episode 6, which dropped today, is an excellent example of just how wildly original this show is in comparison to other shows of the same genre. Also, quick spoiler warning, I will be discussing details from both episodes 6 and 7. If you want more of a broad general video where I just make the case for why people should be watching this show, then go back and watch my review for episodes 1 through 3, and I'll include a link in the video notes below. But what blew my mind about episode 6 was how I managed to imbue so much heart and humanity and genuine feelings of love and a character who up until now has been this truly terrifying godlike entity capable of slaughtering thousands of people without batting an eye. And this is an episode where we learn Mother's Achilles heel or her kryptonite, because now that she's rediscovered the fact that she was in love with the creator who reprogrammed her, she keeps returning to this same pod and plugging in and basically reliving her memories and interactions with him, where she decides to respond much more affectionately. So unbeknownst to her, Marcus and the Mithraics are planning on using this to try to catch her in some sort of feedback loop and drain her of her power. But while she's inside, we're presented with a scene that I think visually was the high watermark of the entire season, where we see her lost in the throes of passion, making love to her creator. They're both stark naked, floating in space, and we're getting into almost strange, like biblical territory here, where the creation and the creator are interacting. It reminded me of some of the best scenes in Blade Runner, when one of the replicants tells their creator, "If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes." But as I was watching this love-making scene, I was thinking, this belongs on the ceiling of like the Sistine Chapel, or maybe that's going a little far, but at a bare minimum, it belongs inside of a cathedral, at least a science fiction cathedral. And I just couldn't believe how stunning the imagery was as the ceiling opened up and all this white goo started pouring down upon them. And I was thinking to myself, this is some of the most stunning imagery we will see in science fiction on the big or small screen all year. So that scene alone would be enough for me to rank episode 6 very highly, but there are a bunch of other great scenes as well. One of my favorite recurring bits of the show is how Father is always trying to explore humor and is obviously totally wasted on Mother, a person where it's safe to say she hasn't exactly developed a funny bone, but he tests out a riddle on her. He says, "When is a door not a door?" And the answer is, "When it's ajar." And of course she doesn't get it and says, "A door is always a door." And the only knock I have against that riddle is that I've heard it before, and who knows how old this riddle is, but I first heard it in Stephen King's Dark Tower series, but who knows, maybe Stephen King stole it from yet another story. In any event, this deep into the season, I think I finally decided the Father is my favorite character. And part of the beauty of this show is how it's very difficult to choose sides between the atheists and the Mithraics. But now that we've seen Father attacked and killed by both sides of the equation, I'm ready to declare my loyalty just as a fan to that particular character. And as I mentioned before in my earlier videos about Raised by Wolves, I feel like there's so much about Raised by Wolves which is perfect for this cultural moment in 2020. I've already talked at length about how I think this show does a brilliant job of showing the limits of blind faith and a very narrow ideology. But this episode featured 2 new scenes, which I feel like almost make this story like a unicorn in the world of mainstream entertainment. There's a scene where Campion and Paul are debating over which objects and which beings have a soul and which ones do not. And Campion says something very wise, which you would never hear in social media. He says, "You know what? We can disagree and still be friends." And I kind of sat back and I was like, all right, try using that rhetoric on Twitter and see where it gets you. Where the prevailing attitude seems to be pick a tribe, pick a camp, and fight to the death defending that camp, no matter what that camp might stand for. And then Campion had another great scene where he was arguing with Mother about the need for or the use of violence. And it's a classic child versus parent argument where in spite of all of her knowledge and all of her power, Mother finally just says, "Do as I say, not as I do." which I think pretty much every single child on the planet can relate to. But what it really reminded me of was some of the hypocrites that you find in social media who love to berate people and tell them what to say and tell them what to do, irrespective of their own personal conduct. But what really hammered home my affection for episode 6 was the astonishing climax where Marcus sends his son Paul back to the settlement to try and steal the necromancer's eyes after his earlier plan to drain her power ends in complete and total disaster. Because when they tried to blow her up, the guy with the explosive just ended up blowing his own hands off, whereupon Mother rose up into the sky and started telekinetically using these boulders as projectile where she would explode them and essentially send rock-like projectiles in all directions, just laying waste to Marcus's team. In any event, the far more risky plan, but the one that ends up working, is when they send Paul into the camp to try to steal Mother's eyes. He pulls it off, and as she's chasing him out of the camp, Marcus is there waiting for her, and he very nearly hacks her to death. And he probably would have if not for the fact that there's this voice that's now starting to dictate his behavior, where he's almost at war within himself. Because as we're starting to see, part of Marcus is starting to believe that he is the child of this prophecy that the Mithraics believe in. But his original personality, his atheist side, is also trying to reassert itself as well. And I'm glad we've got a few more episodes to deal with this mystery because, as we've seen, Campion's hearing this voice. Another little girl keeps seeing Tali. Somebody keeps posting all these strange illustrations, which leads to one of the best arguments between Mother and Father, where Mother's accusing Father of trying to torment her over the fact that she's been making out with her creator in her fantasies. And they're going back and forth and accusing each other of being a liar. In any event, Mother and Father and their interactions, that's the heart and soul of the show. But as great as episode 6 was, episode 7, sadly, really slowed down in tempo. As I was watching it, I just kept thinking to myself, something really needs to happen. And it bounces back a little bit toward the end, where Marcus has this virtual war inside of his own head, where he and his former self fighting each other with knives, but with mirror image moves. But of course, when you're in a battle with yourself, inevitably, any injuries you sustain are going to be pretty brutal, and he ends up disemboweling his own belly. And while this battle's unfolding, we see that Father, in spite of being reprogrammed, some of him is still lingering inside. Throughout episode 7, we see that his finger keeps twitching, almost like he's trying to fight his own programming. And when he's asked to dump Mother down one of those large pits, that left hand that keeps twitching involuntarily grabs the rope, which allows her to catch the rope, climb up, and save herself. But as much as I've been loving watching Abubakar Salim play the character of Father, Travis Fimmel as Marcus is right there behind him, and he's done such a good job of portraying the mixed loyalties of the character. At times, I have trouble remembering whose side the character of Marcus is really on, because on one hand, Marcus loves his new godlike power, where he's looked upon as like a messiah amongst the Mithraics. But we know he originally started out as one of the atheists, something that Sue keeps trying to remind him of as she encourages him just to grab their son and escape to the tropical zone. But it's made Marcus this wildly unpredictable, fascinating character, and I can't wait to see what happens to him over the next 3 episodes. But in terms of where these voices and apparitions might be coming from, there's got to be some connection between Tali being one of the characters who originally fell down in one of those pits several years back, and the fact that she's now appearing to some of the characters in the camp. And as far as who might be projecting these voices that both Campion and Marcus is hearing, I really don't have a fucking clue. But I'm dying to learn more about these pits. I'm dying to learn more about where these humanoid creatures might be come from. Are there any giant serpents left down there? Or are those skeletons on the surface basically the fossils of dinosaurs from a long time ago? But there's so many unanswered questions. But for my money, in spite of the fact that episode 7 was pretty weak, I think this is one of the best written, best directed TV shows in any genre all year. And I hope that slowly but surely over time, as HBO Max starts to accumulate more subscribers, the more people will jump on board and discover the show, because I feel like it's kind of flying under the radar right now. In any event, that's all I got to say for now. I hope y'all are enjoying the show as much as I am. If you want to talk more, you can always hunt me down on Twitter at Colrax, or just leave me a comment in the comments below. But please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. But I can't thank you enough for watching the video. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.